At her grandson's wedding, the daughter-in-law leaned in and whispered, "Why are you even here?" The grandmother, seated quietly near the aisle, didn't respond. Her son avoided her gaze, too occupied with appearances. By the time dessert was served, her departure had been arranged, from the hall, the family group chat, and the inheritance documents. She had spent years as their silent supporter. Now, she was done clapping from the sidelines. And when they looked for her the next day, the empty chair answered first. "Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe." The wedding looked like it had been lifted from the pages of a luxury lifestyle magazine. White canvas tents arched like sails across the hilltop vineyard, golden hour light pooling on the rows of rented mahogany chairs. A jazz trio played something silky and indistinct under the soft murmur of clinking glasses and polite laughter. The scent of rosemary and grilled peaches floated on the late summer air. Linda adjusted the navy crepe dress she hadn't worn in 3 years. It was a little looser than she remembered. She stepped carefully onto the flagstone path, her heels clicking in time with the music, and made her way to the far corner of the tent. She didn't greet anyone. No one came to greet her. She took a seat at the end of an empty row. She watched them, Rachel glowing in pearl earrings and a crisp white sheath, bouquet clenched in French manicured hands. Her laugh, too loud and perfect. Neil beside her, tanned, broad-shouldered in a tailored suit that didn't belong to a man who still drove the same beat-up Toyota he'd used to pick Linda up for ice cream. Linda reached for the sweating glass of lemonade she'd brought from the bar. Her fingers shook a little, but only at first. She sipped and let the tartness settle her. The condensation cooled her palm. Her seat, though unassigned, wasn't hurting anyone. She knew that. But then Rachel saw her. Their eyes met across a table strewn with peonies and linen napkins folded into perfect diamonds. Rachel's expression didn't shift. No surprise, no welcome, just a thin smile that curdled into something sharper as she walked over. "You're not on the guest list," Rachel said, low and smiling as if she were complimenting Linda's dress. "Why are you even here?" Linda held her gaze and said nothing. Behind Rachel, Neil appeared. He glanced between them. His jaw flexed once. Then he looked away. No greeting, no defense. Just a brief glance to the horizon like he was trying to disappear from it all. And he did. He walked off, past the tables, past the bar, toward the vineyard rows. Linda looked at Rachel again. "Congratulations," she said quietly, voice like glass on marble. Then she turned back to her drink. Guests had noticed, not many, but enough. A few heads tilted, whispers exchanged. Someone in a floral dress half smiled, unsure whether to pity her or pretend she hadn't seen. Linda didn't flinch. She placed her glass neatly on the cocktail napkin, crossed her ankles. Her posture was a fortress. From across the tent, Cheryl caught her eye. Linda hadn't seen her in years, not since that last December dinner. Same red curls, same angular face softened by time and worry. She was standing next to a man Linda didn't recognize. Holding a white wine glass loosely in one hand, she mouthed, "You okay?" Linda blinked once. She couldn't bring herself to nod. But Rachel had seen the exchange. "Oh, don't look at her like that," Rachel said, still standing. "You always wanted this drama. You show up here like you're some kind of ghost. No one wanted you here." Linda turned her head slowly. The jazz trio kept playing, oblivious. A waiter passed behind them, adjusting his tray to avoid brushing Rachel's back. She stared at Rachel, not with anger, but with something deeper. Disbelief, clarity, pity. "You're right," Linda said. "I'm not a ghost." Rachel's smile twitched. "I'm the one you buried alive." And with that, Linda stood, not hurried, not shaking, just done. She left the half-full glass on the armrest, picked up her small clutch, and walked away from the tent. No one stopped her. They parted like she wasn't even there. But Cheryl stepped out from her place under the canopy, heels clicking against stone. "Linda," she called, voice taut. Linda didn't turn. "Linda, wait. There's something you don't know about them." Linda froze mid-step. She turned her head just slightly, not enough to show the sting in her eyes. And then Cheryl said it, quietly but loud enough for only Linda to hear. They never meant to marry. The next morning, Linda stood barefoot in the kitchen of the house she still technically owned. Morning light spilled across the cold granite countertops. Her coffee had gone lukewarm. She didn't warm it. Instead, she stared at the open mop drawer in front of her. Folders labeled in black Sharpie: truck insurance, mortgage, Eli tuition, Rachel, staging LLC. Paper trails, every one of them, traced back to her. She sat down slowly, each joint stiff like her body didn't quite trust her anymore. On the table, her laptop blinked to life. She opened the bank's website first. The mortgage was still active. It had been in her name since 2010. Neil had lost his job back then, just after Eli broke his arm on the trampoline. They were a team, she remembered, back when people still said that without irony. Her name was first on the deed, Neil's second. Funny how she'd forgotten that, how they all had. She clicked Contact Us, then Live Chat. Hi, I'd like to begin the process of removing myself from a joint mortgage account. Hi Linda, I can assist with that today. Please verify. The words were sterile, automated, but they steadied her. Not everything had to be a speech. Not everything had to be war. Some justice could come quiet. Next, she opened her email inbox, searched truck insurance. The recurring payment was still auto-debiting from her account, Neil's old F-150, the one he refused to sell even when he'd claimed they couldn't afford her therapy sessions. Click, cancel. Then came Eli's tuition. Linda had paid the first year in full, her graduation gift to him. No interest, no conditions, just pride. But when the second year's paperwork arrived, it had been mailed to Rachel and Neil's new address, not hers. She wasn't listed as parent guardian anymore. Her chest tightened, but she breathed through it. No more stalling. She pulled up her accounts, set reminders to unlist herself from anything with recurring financial ties. By noon, she'd canceled 6 auto drafts, requested ownership changes on 3 joint assets, and scheduled an appointment at the credit union. And through it all, she said nothing. No angry texts, no last-word emails, just paperwork. That afternoon, Cheryl showed up unannounced. She brought 2 iced coffees, one sweet, one black. Cheryl remembered. Linda opened the door in leggings and a faded t-shirt from a 5K she never trained for. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, no pretense. "You're okay?" Cheryl asked, eyes scanning hers. "No," Linda said, "but I'm cleaner than I've felt in years." Cheryl stepped inside. Quiet for a moment as she looked around the house. "It feels different in here." "It is." They sat at the kitchen table, the same one Linda had signed her last will on 4 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her. "I've been detaching all day," Linda said. "Every account, every liability, every history of being the safety net while they jumped." Cheryl took a slow sip of coffee, her voice soft but loaded. "They never imagined you'd make yourself scarce." Linda gave a small, tired smile. "Scarce is polite. I made myself essential for so long that pulling back now probably feels like sabotage to them." "No," Cheryl said. "It feels like grief. You were never small, Linda. They just needed you to believe that." Linda looked down at her hands. No rings, no fresh polish, just calluses from a life of giving, holding, supporting. "I don't want yelling," she said. "No confrontations, no power plays." Cheryl nodded. "I just want the parts of me they used to build their lives back in my name." Later that evening, Linda stood by the shredder in her home office. One by one, the copies went in. Duplicate keys to Neil's truck, old bills she'd paid just to keep things easy, thank you cards from Rachel in her early days of launching that ridiculous homestaging side hustle, the one Linda had fronted $5,000 for, never paid back. She watched the papers slice into confetti, and then something caught her eye in the bottom of the drawer. A sealed envelope, yellowing at the edges, her name in Neil's handwriting. "Linda, if something ever happens to me." Her fingers hovered. She remembered this, back when he used to pretend to be thoughtful, just in case. Emergency planning. Backup contacts. She opened it. Inside were 3 documents: a life insurance policy from 2011, a draft of an old will that named her as the primary beneficiary, and a printout of a shared bank account she didn't recognize. It wasn't the bank they'd used together. It wasn't even in the same state. Her name wasn't on it. But Rachel's was, and there, in the top corner, was a balance, 6 figures. Her breath caught. Not because of the money, because of the date at the top. March 17, 2016. The year he told her they couldn't make ends meet. The year she picked up a second job, tutoring at night. The year Rachel had just needed a little seed money to get her business off the ground. The call came at 7:12 a.m. Rachel had never been an early riser. Linda used to joke that even caffeine waited for her to wake up. But this morning, Rachel's voice burst through the phone like a thunderclap. "You removed your name from the chase line," she snapped. "The one attached to the business account? Without telling us?" Linda blinked once, staring at the morning fog beyond her window. "Yes," she said, calm as glass. "That was the point." "You were the guarantor," Rachel hissed. "I can't get an equipment loan now. They froze my vendor line." Linda stood, walked to the kitchen, and opened the fridge, poured herself orange juice, the kind with pulp. "Then I guess it wasn't really your credit keeping it afloat, was it?" Rachel went silent for a beat. Then, "This is spiteful. You could have just talked to us." Linda took a slow sip. "I spent a decade talking. You heard none of it." She hung up without waiting for a goodbye. 20 minutes later, her cell rang again. Neil. She let it go to voicemail. He called again, then texted, "You just cut us off?" Linda stared at the screen. For once, there was no venom in her chest, only clarity. She called him back. His voice came through tired, brittle. "Why are you doing this now?" She let the question hang for a moment. Then, "I didn't cut you off, Neil." I finally stepped back and let the truth show. He scoffed. "We're scrambling. I've got Eli calling from campus saying his meal card's frozen. Rachel's in tears over some vendor deadline." "And I imagine," Linda said, "none of those conversations include the part where you tell them I was the one holding it together for years." She could hear him exhale. "We didn't ask you to do all that." "No," she said softly. "You expected it. That's worse." She hung up again, this time with no guilt. That afternoon, Linda walked the half-mile to the mailbox with a manila envelope under her arm. The air smelled like October. Dry leaves, chimney smoke, something final. She slid the envelope in the outgoing slot. A single-page letter, one copy for Neil, one for Rachel, one for Eli. It read, "Effective October 10th, 2025. I am no longer a co-signer, guarantor, or financial participant in any legal or informal arrangements under your names. My involvement, both official and implied, is hereby terminated. Any pending obligations are yours alone to resolve. This is not vengeance. This is closure." She walked home slow. For the first time in years, her steps didn't feel borrowed. That weekend, Cheryl posted a message on the neighborhood community board. No names, just a sentiment. "To the quiet backbones of family trees, may you one day feel the weight shift off your shoulders, and may they finally feel what you carried." It wasn't signed, but Linda knew, and so did others. 2 days later, someone from 2 doors down, Mrs. Lasky, paused while raking leaves. "I always wondered how they managed all those renovations," she said to Linda, as if out of nowhere. "Didn't you used to help cover their property taxes?" Linda smiled without warmth. "Not anymore." More whispers followed. Someone else from the PTA texted her out of the blue. "You were the Linda who covered the school trip shortfall that year?" Linda didn't reply. She didn't have to. The phone calls slowed. The texts stopped. But what didn't stop were the invoices. The ones still trying to crawl out of the past and find her. One from Eli's college billing department, addressed to Parent of Record. One from a catering company used for Rachel's failed second launch party, marked Delinquent Contact on File, L. Graham. Linda opened each one, photographed them, then sent each with a forwarding address to Rachel and Neil's new mailbox in Cypress Heights. No sticky notes, no messages, just the silence of accountability. Then, one evening, she walked out to her porch and found a plastic grocery bag on her doorstep. Inside it, an old checkbook. One of hers, but every carbon copy was missing. Just the cover left, blue faux leather worn at the corners, and underneath it, a sticky note, smudged with what looked like wine or maybe tears. You erased yourself. Hope it was worth it. No name, but the handwriting was Rachel's. Linda read it twice, then calmly tore it in half. The message came in just after noon. Linda had been slicing apples for a pie she wasn't sure she'd finish. She saw the name light up on her phone, Eli G. And for a moment, her chest stopped moving. Hey, I know this is random, but did something happen, like between you and Dad? And Rachel? She stared at the text. No anger, no punctuation sharp enough to draw blood. Just a question, just curiosity. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set the phone down, washed her hands, and finished laying the crust across the pie. She'd always found comfort in the process, folding, pressing, fluting the edges like a ritual. The oven door creaked as she slid it in. Then she sat at the kitchen table, pulled the phone back toward her, and typed, "Yes, but not with you. You have a good life now. Enjoy it." The dots blinked, disappeared, blinked again. Dad said you were being dramatic, but I got a bill last week from the school. Said your name was removed. I thought it was some mistake. He told me I had scholarships, that everything was covered. I never knew you helped with that. Linda closed her eyes for a long moment. Not to cry, she was past that today, but just to absorb the sound of his voice in text form. Still unsure, still trying. Your father asked me not to tell you, she finally typed. Said it would embarrass him if people knew I had to step in. I honored that. There was a pause. 3 minutes, then another reply. You paid the whole first year, she typed slowly. Room, board, books, health plan. All of it. Another long pause. 6 minutes this time. She could see him pacing his dorm, probably in that sweatshirt he wore year-round. The one from the robotics team. She'd bought it for him in junior year when they made regionals. He'd hugged her with his whole skinny frame, chin digging into her collarbone. That was before the new house, before Rachel moved in, before things blurred. The next text finally came. I didn't know. I should have known. I'm sorry, she didn't respond. Not yet, but she didn't block him either. 2 days later, a delivery van stopped in front of her house. A man in a navy cap walked to the porch, holding a square white box wrapped in green satin ribbon. The card inside was handwritten. You've always been the real one. Thank you for everything I didn't see. Eli. She touched the petals of the arrangement. Simple wildflowers and 2 white lilies. No roses. No cliché, just something sincere, something unpolished. Linda stood there for a long time, fingers resting on the card, until she heard Cheryl's footsteps behind her on the gravel. You got flowers? Cheryl asked, teasing. That from a secret boyfriend I haven't met yet? Linda turned, managing a half smile. Eli. Cheryl raised her eyebrows. I didn't tell him anything, Linda said. He asked. I answered. That's all. Did he apologize? Linda nodded, barely. Cheryl sipped from her thermos. That boy still has a chance. Linda looked out at the edge of her yard, where the grass gave way to fallen leaves and the first hint of winter's edge. Maybe, she said, but it won't come from me telling him what to feel. If he figures it out, it has to be without guilt. Cheryl watched her a moment. You're gentler than I'd be, Linda smiled faintly. That's what they all counted on. That night, she set the flower arrangement on the dining table, not for display, just so they'd be near while she thought. She sat at the head of the table, alone now, as always, and opened her laptop. This time, not for bills, not for documents, but for records. Not hers, theirs. She opened a new folder and labeled it in all caps, Cypress Heights Trust, Dissolution Notes, and under it she began typing a list. 2016 wire transfer from joint fund Rachel's LLC, formed under Linda's personal address. Eli tuition memo, discrepancy in FAFSA reporting property records. Title not yet amended business write-offs tied to joint filings. She didn't know where it would go yet, but now she was documenting everything. Rachel sat stiff-backed in the corner chair of the lender's office, scrolling through her Instagram business page like it could offer her answers. Sun-drenched foyers, perfectly stacked coffee table books, boucle accent chairs in cream on cream on cream. It all looked polished, like success. The man across the desk, mid-50s, mild tie, eyes patient, cleared his throat. Ms. Graham, just to clarify, your last 2 business expansions were underwritten with a co-signer, Linda Graham? Rachel's face barely twitched. Yes, my husband's aunt. He clicked something on his screen. She's no longer attached to any active credit lines. Rachel sat back. What do you mean? I mean your debt-to-income ratio no longer qualifies. We can't approve the bridge loan. She blinked. But I've never missed a payment, she said. Voice clipped. We have excellent references. Our last job was a $40,000 project in Laguna Park. Right, the loan officer nodded. Empathetic but unmoved. But without Linda's financials included, your file doesn't hold. I'm sorry. If she were willing to re-co-sign, she's not, Rachel said quickly. He nodded again, gently closing the folder between them. Then I suggest pausing further expansion until your balance sheet improves. I'd also recommend consulting a CPA, especially before tax season. Rachel didn't say thank you. She stood. Walked out with her bag clutched tight under her arm like a shield. Outside, the winter light made everything look colder than it felt. She called Neil. Denied, she snapped before he could say hello. Because your aunt pulled out of everything. She was our net. Don't you get that? There was a long pause. Then Neil said, It was never ours, Rach. You know that, right? She hung up before he finished. Across town, Linda stood in the vestibule of St. Augustine's, her coat still dusted with snow. The warmth inside smelled like lemon oil and candle wax, familiar and still. Cheryl came out from the back office, surprised. You haven't been here in almost a year. Linda handed her a sealed envelope. Don't open it until I leave. Cheryl frowned. What is it? Scholarship fund, Linda said. For girls applying to trade schools or community college. Doesn't matter. No names, no plaques. Cheryl weighed the envelope, eyebrows lifting slightly. That's not a small number, is it? It's not a small need, Linda replied. Her voice was gentle, but final. Cheryl looked at her for a long time. You're writing your legacy in pen now, Linda smiled faintly. No more pencil, she turned to go. Behind her, Cheryl called softly. You don't need to stay gone, you know. Linda paused, but didn't turn back. I know. That night, just before bed, her phone buzzed again. Neil. She let it ring. It buzzed again. Then a text. You've made your point. She stared at the words. Such a tidy phrase. As if this were about proving something. As if it hadn't cost her years to unlearn her silence. She typed back slowly. That wasn't my point, Neil. This is my piece. There was no reply. The next morning, snow blanketed the yard in clean white. Linda made tea, no sugar. She stood by the window, watching a small group of cardinals fight over the feeder. Red on white. Vibrant, unafraid. She walked back to her home office and opened the Cypress Heights Trust, dissolution notes folder again. She wasn't finished. Not yet. But something had shifted. She minimized the spreadsheet and opened a blank Word doc. At the top she wrote, People think the strongest person is the one who holds it all together. Sometimes it's the one who lets go first. She didn't know if she'd ever share it, but she needed it written. Rachel left the first voicemail just after sunrise. Cheryl, hey, it's me. Listen. I think this whole thing with Linda's gotten blown out of proportion. She's overreacting. You know how she gets when she feels left out. She sounded upbeat, even chipper, like she was explaining away a canceled dinner plan, not a lawsuit. Cheryl didn't call back, so Rachel left another. She's cutting off her own family over what? Money? Old stuff? It's toxic. I just don't think it's healthy to feed into that narrative. That word again. Narrative. As if truth were a mood board. Later that day, Rachel tried someone else. Susan from the neighborhood council. Then Dee from choir. Then Helen, who still ran the town's annual fall bake-off and hadn't seen Linda in person since 2221. Each time, her voice grew tighter, more polished, more defensive. She's making this dramatic, she kept saying. Like we abandoned her. We didn't. She distanced herself. That was her choice. By voicemail 4, it wasn't just tone policing. It was a story rewrite. 2 days later, Cheryl posted on the St. Augustine community board. Some people don't notice a quilt missing its thread until winter comes. You made her feel like a stain on your linen. Now you miss her warmth? No names, no hashtags. But everyone knew, and Linda didn't have to say a word. That same afternoon, her phone buzzed with a new name, Gail M., an old friend from Linda's substitute teaching years. They hadn't spoken since Gail retired and moved 2 towns north. "Just heard what happened," Gail said, voice warm and slow like molasses. "You got any plans now that you're finally living for you?" "Not really," Linda said truthfully. "I think I've just started breathing again." "Well," Gail chuckled, "I got a little cottage next to a pond, and a neighbor who bakes cookies and swears she's 82 but flirts like she's 40. We've got walking trails, live jazz on Fridays, and no one asking to borrow your credit score." Linda laughed. An honest, unfiltered laugh. She hadn't realized how long it had been since her body remembered how to make that sound. Gail continued, "Come tour it, no pressure. Just see what freedom can smell like." That weekend, Linda made the drive. The village was quiet, tucked between pines, with houses that had wide porches and mailboxes painted in soft personal colors: coral, periwinkle, sage green. The kind of place where people waved with their whole hand. A breeze lifted her hair as she stepped out of the car, clean, brisk, no exhaust, no tension. She walked the loop twice, chatting with a couple who invited her in for cider, then sat on a bench overlooking the pond. The sun danced across it like someone had polished the whole surface just for her. She took a deep breath. "First time I've wanted to move in years." The words came out before she could stop them. But they were true. Back home, she didn't start with closets or junk drawers. She started with the bookshelf. She packed the novels she loved, the ones she'd read and reread, not because they were good, but because they knew her. She wrapped the ceramic cardinal Cheryl gave her last Christmas, folded the scarf Eli bought from that college art fair, slid the photo of her and her sister, back when they still wrote letters, into a folder marked Keep. Everything else stayed put. She wasn't taking her past, just the parts that still warmed her. That night, Rachel posted on Facebook, "Family should never turn their back. Some wounds go deeper than the surface." Choose love, Pochik, keep the door open. It got 9 likes and 2 comments. One from Helen, hoping things heal with time. The other from Susan, "Didn't Linda pay for Eli's first year at USC?" Rachel didn't reply, but by morning, the post was gone. It was just after 6 p.m. when the knock came. Not loud, just persistent. Linda had been in the middle of taping the bottom of a moving box labeled Kitchen Keep when the sound floated through the hallway. She paused, tape halfway across the cardboard, heart steady. She already knew who it was. She opened the door slowly. Neil stood there, hands in his coat pockets, eyes undercut with exhaustion, but not humility. Never that. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just clear the air." Linda stepped aside, not to let him in, but to let the wind cut between them. Cold, unbothered. "You already cleared it," she said. "Right in front of everyone." He looked down at the porch boards, his boots damp with melted snow. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad. There's been a lot going on. Stress, pressure. The wedding planning was chaotic. We were trying to keep everything together." Linda leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "And in all that trying, you didn't say my name once. Not when Rachel humiliated me in front of your friends. Not when the guests looked over like I was the unpaid help. You didn't speak. You didn't flinch." Neil rubbed the back of his neck, like that gesture alone could wipe away a decade of silence. "I didn't know what to say." "You didn't want to say anything," Linda corrected. "Because if you had, then Rachel would have seen exactly where the cracks were." He opened his mouth, closed it. Then finally, "You're right." Linda arched a brow. "Say it louder." "Maybe your ego didn't hear it." Neil let out a breath that might have passed for a laugh if it hadn't died halfway through. "Look, I've made mistakes." "Mistakes are forgetting a birthday," she said. "Not letting someone bankroll your life for 12 years and calling it support." He winced. "You always make things sound worse than they are." "No," she said calmly. "I just don't water down the truth anymore." They stood in the doorway like actors between scenes, him wanting something unsaid, her done giving it. "I'm not here to argue," he said finally. "I'm just asking if there's a path forward, some way to, I don't know, reset." Linda looked at him for a long time. There was a time she would have cracked right there, a time when his voice softened like that. would have reminded her of the boy who once drove across town at midnight to bring her cough drops after her surgery. That boy was gone. "Sure," she said. Neil blinked. "Yeah?" She nodded once. "Walk it yourself." He opened his mouth to respond, but she'd already begun closing the door. "Linda, wait." But the click of the latch beat his sentence to the finish line. Inside, she exhaled through her nose, slow and silent. Then returned to her box, smoothed the tape, and wrote underneath the label, "No longer needed to be heard." She stood, stretched her back, and walked to the record player in the corner. Pulled out a vinyl she hadn't touched in years, Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Cole Porter Songbook, and let the first notes wrap around the living room like silk. She didn't need a reply. She didn't need a witness. She just needed the air not to be full of lies. The letter arrived on a Thursday. No logo, no return address. Just her name, Linda Graham. Written in pen on the front, the way Eli always used to label things. Small block letters, slightly slanted right. She brought it inside without ceremony, placed it on the counter, made tea, fed the cardinals, let the kettle whistle long enough to feel earned. Only then did she sit and open it. The handwriting was neater than his texts, a little older than she remembered, but unmistakable. "Dear Linda, I know I've said thank you, but I don't think there's a version of those words that holds enough weight for what you did for me, and for who you've always been. We're having a baby girl, and we're naming her Linda Hope Cartwright, because you gave me both. Hope when I didn't know I needed it. And a name I want her to grow into. Love, Eli." She stared at the words, not because she didn't believe them, but because they settled into her like a memory returning home. Familiar, sacred, earned. She didn't sob, no dramatic gasp, just tears slow and warm, threading down her cheeks as if her body had finally found a reason to open. She folded the letter and held it to her chest. Then, without overthinking it, she walked to the hallway, pulled down the small wooden frame she used to keep family photos in, slipped the letter inside, and set it gently on her mantel, above the cardinals, beneath the clock, right in plain sight. The luncheon happened the following Sunday. Cheryl hosted it at the church's side hall, nothing formal, no announcements, just folding tables covered in sun-yellow cloth, faces of backyard mums, and potluck dishes arranged with real affection. Linda arrived in a soft gray sweater and earrings she hadn't worn since her retirement party. She wasn't expecting speeches. She wasn't expecting anything at all. But when she walked in, the room shifted. Bonnie from the choir came first, placing a clear bowl of banana pudding on the table. "Because you always brought the kindness," she said, eyes glassy. Then came Judy with deviled eggs, a plate covered in cellophane. Then Marcy with lemon bars. Then Ellen with rolls still warm from the oven. "Don't make it a fuss," Cheryl said, hugging her. "It's not a send-off. It's a send forward." Linda smiled, her throat tight. "Feels like I exist again, and not just in the background." "You never were," Cheryl said. "They just stood in the way." As people filled the room, Linda moved from table to table, not like a guest of honor, but like someone finally home. No one asked about the lawsuit. No one brought up Rachel. No one whispered Neil's name. They brought stories. "Remember when you knitted those hats for the preemies at St. Clair's? You taught my daughter how to bake without measuring. Still drives me nuts. You stayed late every night that December when the heater broke in the kitchen." Linda didn't remember all the moments, but the room did. That mattered more. After the guests left and the last dishes were packed, Cheryl sat beside her in the folding chairs near the window. Afternoon sun poured in across the linoleum. "You gonna keep the house?" Cheryl asked gently. Linda thought for a long moment. "Not the structure," she said. "But the name on the deed? I'm not erasing that." "You shouldn't." Linda reached into her purse, pulled out a photo, Eli, standing next to his wife, holding a tiny ultrasound. She passed it to Cheryl. "She's due in March." Cheryl smiled. "March is a good month for strong girls." Linda nodded. "It is." The sanctuary still smelled like lemon oil and hymnals when Rachel arrived. Her heels clicked too loud on the tile floor. Her makeup sat too perfect. Her smile, frosted pink, layered over tension, arrived a full second before the rest of her did. She sat 2 rows from the front, just off-center, where the light from the stained glass pooled most dramatically. Her coat draped neatly across her lap, posture upright, as if the service were a photo shoot, and she was already centered in the frame. Cheryl saw her, of course, but she didn't falter. She took the pulpit, warm and unshaken, her announcements crisp as ever. Next Saturday we'll have a coat drive for Bayview Shelter. Bring what you can spare. Donations accepted in the blue bins near the back. She flipped the bulletin page. And we want to give thanks this morning for a member who quietly funded 3 full scholarships this winter, including one for a single mother returning to school. She paused just long enough. Linda Graham, your kindness continues to ripple outward. Heads turned toward the back row, but Linda wasn't in her usual pew. She'd come in through the side door, sat near the wall with Gail, away from center stage. She didn't raise her hand, didn't nod, just stayed still, letting the wave pass gently over her. But the corner of her mouth pulled slightly, like something inside her had just exhaled. Cheryl moved on. Rachel's smile didn't budge, but the corners of her eyes gave her away. Too wide, too long. The way someone smiles when they've realized the room is no longer performing back. After the final hymn, people rose in clusters, some to hug, some to chat, some to stack chairs. Bonnie passed out flyers. Judy handed out fresh-baked bread. No one stopped Rachel. Not one handshake. No passing comment about how lovely her hair looked. Not even from Helen, who had once been her biggest defender in the choir room. Rachel stood near the door, coat folded over her arm, waiting for someone to make it make sense. No one did. At the far edge of the sanctuary, Gail tapped Linda gently on the arm. Let's go out the side. Linda didn't look back. Outside, the cold had softened into a clean gray sky, clouds slow-moving like ships drifting out to sea. The air smelled like pine and something sweet from the bake sale table still set up near the parking lot. Linda and Gail walked quietly to the car, steps in sync. Behind them, Rachel emerged from the front doors, face still composed, but her hands clutching her coat a little too tight. Her gaze swept the parking lot like a cast member waiting for a curtain call that never came. She saw Linda walking away. Watched her open the car door, watched the woman who once stood behind the curtain of her life, who once co-signed the very stage she stood on, now walk off script, with someone else beside her. Rachel didn't call out, didn't chase. She just stood there, finally outside the glass box of her own performance. And the silence said everything. 3 days later, Linda opened her front door to find Eli standing there. No warning, no text, just him. He looked tired, but settled. A softness in his face she hadn't seen since the year before college, before Rachel, before the split. He stepped forward and pulled her into a hug, tight, quiet, complete. No apology, no speech, just arms around shoulders, heart against heart. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, time held still. The house was still. Not quiet, the HVAC hummed. Birds called faintly from the backyard, but still in the way a held breath is, the kind of stillness you only notice when it's about to end. Linda stood in the center of the living room, one last box open at her feet. The carpet, vacuumed in clean lines. The walls, bare. Even the scent had shifted. Less lavender and books, more drywall and dust. She had bought this house 4 months after her husband died. Not because she loved it, but because it felt safe. Empty but manageable. A place to fold herself into and survive. Now it felt like a cast she'd finally outgrown. She reached into the last box and pulled out a photo, Eli at age 10, grinning with frosting on his nose from that July birthday cake. She tucked it into her tote, then the recipe card for her mother's sweet cornbread, and the ceramic robin that used to sit by the kitchen sink. Everything else, she left it, because it didn't feel like her anymore. The for sale sign had gone up on a Wednesday. It was under contract by Friday. The woman buying it, a nurse, newly divorced, walked the halls like someone who needed soft corners and a second start. Linda liked her immediately. She left a small envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a note. No ghosts, just good bones. The rest is yours to write. LG. Moving day came under a pale blue sky. Linda didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She just loaded the last box into Gail's SUV, folded the flaps on her past, and buckled herself into the passenger seat. They drove north in silence for the first 10 minutes. Then Gail said, "You feel it yet?" Linda didn't answer right away, but as the town receded behind them, replaced by pines and winding roads, she whispered, "It doesn't ache. That's new." Gail reached over and gave her knee a soft pat. "That's not new. That's you." The retirement village greeted them with soft wind chimes and porch lights, already glowing in the late afternoon. Linda's new cottage sat at the end of the row, white siding, navy shutters, and a wraparound porch that begged for a rocking chair. Inside, the floors gleamed. The windows framed nothing but sky and trees. No photos of Rachel. No hand-me-downs from Neil. No shadows. Just space. Gail helped hang the linen curtains while Linda unpacked her books. Only the ones that felt like truth. The last to go on the shelf, Bird by Anne Lamott. Its spine cracked, its corners soft. "I always knew you'd do this," Gail said, adjusting the curtain rod. "Move? No! Get free." The next morning, Cheryl arrived with a gift basket wrapped in cellophane, balancing a loaf of banana bread and a stitched square framed in oak. Linda peeled back the tissue paper and read the cross-stitch. Still standing. The thread was soft blue, the stitching imperfect. Real. "Didn't know if you had wall space," Cheryl said, setting it down on the mantel. "Didn't care." Linda leaned it upright. "It's perfect." Later, after the dishes were washed and the house had gone quiet again, Linda poured herself a fresh mug of coffee. No sugar, no cream. She walked to the window, slid it open half an inch, and let the morning air in. She sipped, and then whispered, "Finally tastes like mine." That afternoon, 2 towns away, a gray sedan idled in front of her old house. Neil sat in the driver's seat, staring at the window he used to climb through when he'd forget his keys. The wind rustled the dead grass near the curb. A sold sticker now crossed the for sale sign. He didn't get out of the car, didn't knock, didn't call. He just sat there for a while, then drove away. Back at the cottage, Linda folded fresh laundry into neat squares and stacked it on her new shelves. She lit a lavender candle, put on Ella Fitzgerald, opened a new notebook with crisp white pages. No one else's name was written inside, and for the first time in years, she wasn't bracing for a call, or a bill, or a favor disguised as family. She wasn't cleaning up after anyone else's choices. She was simply home, at last. The baby shower was held at a private garden cafe tucked behind a local inn. White bistro tables under a canopy of dogwoods, mason jars filled with lemon sprigs, cloth napkins tied with twine and soft gray ribbon. Intimate, tasteful, no fanfare, just love, no banners, no games, no mandatory speeches. Eli's wife, Morgan, greeted each guest with the kind of warmth that didn't need rehearsing. Her dress was simple, sage green, loose at the waist. One hand rested gently on her growing belly. The other, when Linda arrived, went straight to hers. "I'm so glad you're here." Linda blinked, taken off guard by the sincerity, but Morgan didn't let go. She pulled her into a hug, real and full, the kind that doesn't hesitate. "You're already family," she whispered into Linda's shoulder. "You always were." Linda handed her a carefully wrapped box. Cream tissue paper tied with navy satin ribbon. Inside, a hand-stitched quilt. Not perfect, but close. Rows of soft flannel and cotton, each square stitched by hand in the quiet evenings after dinner. A thread of deep red ran diagonally through the patchwork, just enough to draw the eye without asking for it. Morgan lifted it gently, brushing her fingers over one square embroidered with a name in careful, looping script. Linda Hope. "She'll know who she's named after," Morgan said, voice steady. "Not just in name, but in spirit." Linda nodded, unable to speak. She hadn't cried in months, but today her chest felt open in a way that didn't hurt. The place cards were small, folded white cardstock with gold calligraphy ink. Each table had 6 chairs, arranged around delicate floral centerpieces. At one end, beneath a lantern strung with baby socks and booties, Linda saw it. A single place card, Great Grandma Linda. She stood still for a moment, as if waiting for someone to say it was a mistake. But no one did. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a formality, it was where she belonged. Photos were taken, soft, candid shots, not forced group poses. Laughter mid-bite, toast half-finished, hugs caught in motion. Linda didn't step out of the frame this time. No one cropped her at the shoulder. No one asked her to take the photo instead. In one picture, she stood beside Morgan and Eli, her hand lightly on Morgan's shoulder, the quilt draped over the stroller in the background. In another, she was laughing, eyes closed, head tipped back, while someone handed her a pink onesie with the words, "Hope is her middle name," screen printed in white. No makeup touch-up. No edits, just presence. Real? Rachel wasn't there, neither was Neil. No one asked why, because no one needed to. The absence didn't weigh down the room, it lifted it. The air didn't carry tension, only gratitude, only joy that didn't feel manufactured. Even Eli, who once spent so long trying to keep the peace between two versions of a family, seemed freer in his body. The lines around his eyes had softened. His voice was lighter when he introduced Linda to a new coworker or an old friend as the one who got me through college. Not aunt, not stand-in, just truth. Later, when the sun dipped low and most of the guests had gone, Linda stayed behind to help fold napkins and box up leftover cake. Morgan sat on a bench, hand resting on her belly, looking over the garden. "She kicks every time you speak," she said softly. Linda smiled. "Smart girl." Morgan looked over. "You okay?" Linda took a breath. It filled her not with heaviness, but with something warm and firm and quietly rooted. "I'm not used to being wanted like this," she said. "Not without expectation, not because I'm holding something up." Morgan's voice was gentle. "You're not holding us up. You're standing with us." Linda nodded. "That's new." She left with a small box of lemon cookies and a Polaroid tucked into her purse. Eli, Morgan, and herself, arms linked, laughing. On the back, in Morgan's handwriting, 3 generations of Linda Hope. The drive back to the cottage was calm. Sunset amber lit the treetops, and the air through her cracked window smelled like honeysuckle and memory. When she got home, she changed into her softest pajamas, made a cup of mint tea, and sat at her writing desk by the window. She opened her notebook. On the first page, in fresh ink, she wrote, "I am not what they left. I am what I carried forward. And now she'll carry me too." She closed the notebook, this time not to put it away, but to rest her hand on it, not to brace, not to guard, just to feel what peace feels like when it stays. The Cypress Heights Community Newsletter arrived in most mailboxes by Wednesday morning, folded crisp as usual, and slipped inside with the grocery ads and the library calendar. Cheryl had submitted the baby shower photo herself. She didn't ask Linda's permission. She didn't have to. The image ran mid-page on glossy stock, full color. A sun-drenched garden table. A breeze-lifting soft fabric. And in the middle, Linda, smiling down at a tiny pink onesie in her hands. The words "Hope is her middle name," visible even in the curve of the cotton. No filters, no edits, no cropped shoulders. Her silver hair caught the light like a crown, her eyes crinkled in mid-laugh. Just behind her in the frame, Morgan and Eli stood with arms linked, gazing at her with the kind of affection you don't pose for. The caption, handwritten by Cheryl, ran beneath. "Generations of strength, sown in love." Nothing else, no mention of who wasn't there, no room for questions. Just the truth. Printed and delivered. Rachel saw it first on her front stoop, tucked into a pile of mail she'd been avoiding for days. She flipped through without intention, a coffee mug in one hand, her phone in the other, and then the photo stopped her. She stood barefoot on the cold tile of her kitchen floor, the paper trembling just slightly as the sunlight poured in too bright. She didn't speak, she didn't curse, she didn't cry, she just looked. And then she set the newsletter down without folding it, walked to the sink, and turned on the tap like it could drown something unspoken. Neil saw it hours later on Facebook. The community newsletter had posted a digital version, and someone had tagged Eli. Neil was mid-scroll when the image loaded. He froze, thumb hovering, jaw tight. There she was, Linda, still, visible, chosen. His screen went blurry for a second, then sharp again, as if it wanted to make sure he couldn't misread it. generations of strength, sown in love. He didn't comment, didn't like it, didn't share it, but he stared longer than he meant to. And later that night, in the privacy of a garage that still smelled faintly of oil and regrets, he opened an old box labeled 2008 tax docs. Inside was a faded photo of Linda holding Eli on her hip, smiling, arms strong, shoulders squared. He stared at that one too. Back in town, Cheryl printed a copy of the photo and pinned it to the St. Augustine's bulletin board, right beneath the prayer chain and the bake sale sign-up sheet. She didn't tape over the caption. She let it breathe. By Sunday morning, 3 people had complimented the photo. One had quietly wiped away tears. And someone else, Helen, who used to walk with Rachel every Tuesday, brought banana pudding to potluck for the first time in months. Something about it just felt right again, she said. No one disagreed. At the cottage, Linda didn't know the photo had run until she opened her mailbox late Thursday afternoon. A note from Cheryl had been slipped inside the folded copy. Had to. Couldn't let the world keep cropping you out. See. Linda unfolded the newsletter slowly, her fingers tracing the caption, her eyes falling on the photo like it was a mirror she wasn't afraid to look into. She brought it inside, clipped it to her fridge with a wooden magnet shaped like a teacup, and stared for a moment longer than she meant to. Not to marvel, but to remember, she looked like someone she'd once hoped to become. And somehow, quietly, without spectacle, she'd done it. That evening, she sipped tea in her reading chair, quilt draped over her lap, cardinal feeder full outside the window. She didn't need more than this. And for the first time, the past didn't feel like something unfinished. It felt folded, put away, but never erased. Linda sat at her kitchen table, the same one she'd sanded and painted herself last spring. The afternoon light poured through the window, falling across a blank sheet of paper and a fountain pen that hadn't been used since her husband's will was drafted years ago. She adjusted her glasses, smoothed the page flat, took a deep breath, then began. You wanted to erase me. I just let you go. I used to think forgiveness meant pretending it didn't hurt. Now I know it's just walking away without dragging the wound behind you. You told people I overreacted, that I held grudges. But I remember things differently. I remember paying the mortgage when your signatures were missing. I remember the calls from the bank, the ones I answered while you were on vacation. I remember the day you borrowed $5,000 just until the business took off. I remember you telling me to keep quiet about helping Eli with college, so you could look like the provider. I remember being the invisible guest at your wedding, sitting in the back while you pretended not to know me. I didn't leave out of anger. I left because I finally understood that loyalty shouldn't mean disappearing for someone else's comfort. You've spent years building a life made of surface things, a life that photographs well. I've built something smaller, but it holds. You don't need to explain any of this to me, or anyone. They already know. Linda. She read it twice, not to edit, but to confirm that the words sounded like her. They did. Not sharp, not trembling, not the voice of a woman trying to win anything. Just clean. Gail arrived just as Linda was folding the paper. She didn't knock, just let herself in, carrying a thermos and that knowing look she always wore when she didn't need to ask what was going on. You wrote it, Gail said, spotting the envelope on the table. I did. Want me to read it? Linda slid it over. Gail unfolded it carefully, reading in silence. Her eyes moved slowly, once, twice. Then she nodded. This is clean, she said finally. No blood, no residue. Linda smiled. That's the point. They drank tea in companionable quiet. Outside, wind moved through the trees, scattering the first gold leaves across the porch. You gonna mail it? Gail asked. Linda looked at the envelope. Plain cream, unsealed. No return address. Yeah, she said softly. Not for them to answer. Just for me to send. At the post office, she stood in line behind a young woman juggling a toddler and a diaper bag, and a man mailing a care package overseas. No one looked twice at her envelope. When it was her turn, the clerk smiled. Standard mail? Yes. He weighed it, affixed the stamp, and slid it into the bin. Gone, just like that. Linda felt lighter walking out than she had walking in. That evening, Cheryl stopped by with soup and 2 bowls. She kicked off her boots at the door and joined Linda on the couch. So, she said, tucking her legs under her, did you do it? Linda nodded. Mailed it this afternoon. Cheryl stirred her soup slowly. You say what needed saying. Only once, Linda said. That's all it ever needed. Cheryl gave a small smile. Closure's quiet, isn't it? Linda leaned back, eyes on the window where dusk had begun to pool. It's quieter than I thought it'd be. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. No television, no noise. Just spoons against porcelain and the hum of the evening settling in around them. After Cheryl left, Linda carried her mug to the sink, rinsed it, and set it upside down to dry. The house was still. But it wasn't lonely. It was hers. The next morning, she stepped out onto the porch with her coffee. The air was cool, clean, the kind that tastes like a beginning. She thought about the letter, not where it was, or if they'd open it, or what they'd think. It didn't matter. It wasn't about being heard anymore. It was about finally having nothing left to say. She took another sip, closed her eyes, and smiled. The silence didn't ache this time. It hummed, like peace does. The envelope came by courier, hand-delivered to her door late Tuesday morning, just as Linda was repotting the rosemary by her kitchen window. It was thick, heavy, gold-sealed. From the office of Cartwright, Hale and Burns. She recognized the name. It was the same firm that handled Morgan's legal work after the baby shower. She dried her hands on a dish towel, unlatched the seal, and slid the contents free. Her eyes scanned the first line, then the second, then stopped. Designation of guardian, Linda Graham. Attached, trust documentation, health directives, contingency plans, all built around one name, Linda Hope Cartwright. The knock on the door came an hour later. Eli? No fanfare, no announcement. Just him, standing with a canvas tote slung over one shoulder and a warm, quiet look on his face. I figured you'd read it before I got here. Linda opened the door wider, stepped aside. You figured right. They sat at the dining table, the one she'd set with 2 mugs before she even heard the knock. One with lemon, one with black tea. Eli took his without sugar. She has us, obviously, he said, fingers laced together, elbows off the table like she'd taught him. But we wanted a plan. Just in case. Linda didn't speak. Not yet. Eli kept going. Her trust will cover education, medical, emergency expenses. Morgan's firm helped us draw it all up. It's airtight. He reached into his tote and pulled out a slim folder. This one's yours. It outlines your role, if anything happens. Linda placed her hand over the folder, not to read it, but to steady it. Eli looked at her with eyes that mirrored his daughter's ultrasound. Clear, forming, wide with trust. You've always protected, he said softly, even when they didn't see it, especially then. She swallowed, her throat suddenly full. Still, no speech, just a slow smile. Small, whole, that was her answer. Later that evening, Gail and Cheryl came by with a bottle of sparkling apple cider, 3 tumblers, and a paper crown from the dollar store that Cheryl insisted on placing gently atop Linda's head. No speeches, Linda warned, laughing softly. No need, Cheryl said. You already lived it. They toasted on the front porch, under a slow sky smeared with lavender and fading gold. To peace, Gail said. To earned endings, Cheryl added. Linda raised her glass, the paper crown slightly askew. To beginnings that don't come at anyone else's expense. Inside, after they left, Linda stood by the mantel and looked at the photo still clipped to her fridge, the one from the baby shower. Then at the quilt folded neatly on the back of her armchair. Then at the name on the document now tucked into her desk drawer. She wasn't a fallback, not a safety net, not a footnote to someone else's ego. She was named, trusted, known, and for the first time, her role wasn't something she had to earn by staying silent. It was something she'd earned by walking away. That night, the wind came in gentle through the half-open window. Her tea steamed on the bedside table, and the cardinal, ever loyal, settled on the feeder just outside the pane. Linda turned off the lamp. The house didn't creak anymore. It breathed. With her. The check had been mailed under an LLC, Cardinal Blue Foundation, with no address, no note, no personal fingerprints. Only Cheryl knew who was behind it. The donation arrived just weeks after the finance committee at St. Augustine's had resigned itself to duct tape and tarps. The roof had held through years of weather and wishes, but this past spring's rain had finally broken it. The check covered it, all of it. No strings, no headline, no photo op. Only a small request, submitted on a single slip of paper in Cheryl's tidy script. Plaque to read in honor of the forgotten, we remember. Placed just above the garden entrance, beneath the chime. The church board approved it without question. Some assumed it referred to the veterans. Some thought it was a poetic nod to old congregants. Cheryl never explained, and Linda never stepped into the spotlight. That summer, on a golden afternoon brushed in breeze, Linda walked the gravel path behind her cottage. No cane, no errand, just her hands tucked in her pockets and peace in her steps. The lavender she'd planted last year had bloomed early. The rosemary had crept into the stone border like it belonged there all along. She paused beneath the arbor and tilted her face to the sun. The light no longer felt borrowed. It felt hers. Eli arrived just after lunch, carrying a canvas diaper bag, a half-drunk iced coffee, and a small bundle in soft yellow cotton. Morgan had a conference call, he said. And besides, she asked for you. Linda raised an eyebrow. She's 3 months old, Eli, he grinned. She's very advanced. Linda reached out and took the baby, who blinked up at her with milk-drunk eyes and a scrunch of the nose that looked impossibly like her own. Tucked to the edge of the onesie was a small laminated name tag. L. Hope. Linda smiled. You're doing? She asked. Eli nodded. We wanted her to get used to her name. It seemed right to start with you. They sat on the bench Gail had helped her sand and paint last spring, soft green, worn smooth now by time and morning sun. Gail appeared with a camera, her grin teasing. Don't move, she said, already adjusting the focus. You finally look like the main character. Linda rolled her eyes, but didn't shift. She looked down at the baby sleeping soundly against her chest. Eli beside her, his head tilted back, laughing at something far away. The shutter clicked, and for once, no part of her pulled back. That evening, she made tea as the light waned. Eli had gone. Gail had waved from her porch. The baby blanket was folded on the arm of the chair. The photograph, already printed, was pinned on the fridge beside the old baby shower picture. Linda stood by the window, mug warm between her palms, the scent of mint and lemon balm curling into the air. She watched the sky change and thought of everything that didn't need saying anymore, of the voices that used to tell her where she belonged, and how she now heard none of them. Only the wind, only the birds. Only her own heartbeat, steady in its rhythm. Later, she opened her journal, not to write, but to reread the pages that had carried her here. At the very front, she'd written something months ago, when her hands still trembled at the thought of letting go. Now she read it again. At my grandson's wedding, my son's wife said, "Why are you even here? We didn't invite you." And my son just looked away. Next day, I pulled my name from every account that kept them afloat. Linda smiled softly. She didn't add a new sentence. She didn't need to. The story was done. But she wasn't.